Hello and welcome, Exiles. I'd like to introduce you to my Chieftain Righteous Fire, my take on it, what I'm trying, which is trying to build around the new Warcry node, Sun's Roar, I believe. This one right here. Warcries have infinite power and 30 buff effect. If you have these two nodes, and then you grab just simply this wheel here and this wheel here, you're looking at 100% Warcry buff effect, which I think is pretty cool with the new Warcries. Now I'm going to open up a map here, get into a little bit of a showcase, and I'll talk about it as I go. Now, when they released the new change to Chieftain, I was very excited because I felt like that made it a lot more usable in a lot more cases, and I was just a big fan of that. Now I'm getting to finally trying it out, and I'm doing the Sun Roar while having my Warcries being automated, all except Intimidating Cry, and I'll get around to that. But my Enduring Cry and my Ancestral Cry, which is also giving me max res and res and regen, those are the buffs we get from them, are being completely automated, and you'll see them go off as we run through this map specifically. Now, what did I like about this, and why do I think it's good for RF? Enduring Cry at a baseline with max power gives 10% regen per second. With 100 buff effect, that's 20% regen per second. And that's a pretty big amount, especially if you consider the fact you can scale that with regen rate, which is a suffix you can get on boots and gloves and helmet, as well as you can get it on, I want to say, the tree, and potentially if you were to like steal the jugs node, etc., you can scale it. So myself personally, I have about 55 regen or something like that regen rate, which ends up making it give me roughly 30% of my life pool per second. If you look at my life pool, I have about 20,000. So the difference in when Enduring Cry is on versus not on is roughly the difference in, I don't know, 6k regen or something like that. You'll also notice throughout this map, you may have looked down at my, oh, there's bosses here while the dude's going in. I thought the bosses would have been on the earlier guy. You'll notice I'll have 5 Valor F ticks right here. I press it once, it goes down to 2, but I still have more to click. This is something that I want to showcase, which I think is very, very strong, which is the fact Shepherd of Souls is very good with Val Righteous Fire. Now, I'm going to finish up talking about the Warcry buffs and what they do, and then I'm going to get a little bit into Shepherd of Souls and what's interesting about that. Sorry, I'm getting my brain going all over the place here. But, okay, so Enduring Cry, 10% base regen. Between this Chieftain node right here and these 7 passives, 3 on this wheel and 4 here, we have 100% buff effect to Warcries. We also have Ancestral Cry right here, which gives a base of 3 max all resistance or max LE res, which with 100 buff effect scales to 6. So 20% base regen, 3% max all res, which goes to 6 max all res. And then we also have Intimidating Cry, which would give us up to 3% movement speed for 5 power. So that gives us up to 36 movement speed because it's 18% times 2, which is a lot of extra movement speed. Now, originally I was planning to have Intimidating Cry in here. I'm going to give you a little showcase of what this looks like. If you look at my buff effects in the top left here, you'll see them go, and there will be roughly a 1 to 2 second downtime in this setup. You'll see they go down, and then boom, they're back. Okay. Now, the problem here is I could spec 2 points here for a little bit of Warcry duration, and that would get me basically where I need to be, but it would still be, there would still be just a nanosecond of downtime. And for me, my comfort level said that's just a little bit too much downtime because I am capping my res with Ancestral Cry, and I want to make sure it's up. So in the end, I had 1 Warcry I was occasionally pesting for movement speed, and the other 2 Warcry were always up with the more duration support. Now, how am I generating these Warcries? Why am I using the Apple? I'm not a big fan of the idea of manually casting the Warcries. I believe it leads to a stronger character overall in terms of power, but it leads to also me having to press more buttons, have to think more, have to be more active, which is like, it's a good thing and a bad thing. It depends who you are. Maybe you'll like that, maybe you won't. So what are we doing with Apple? How are we generating these Warcries automatically? Apple says when you reach maximum endurance charges, it will trigger a Warcry, and then you will lose all endurance charges. And the key thing to get around this is minimum endurance charges. That's the key. So what we have here is we have 4 minimum endurance charges, and then I have 2 maximum on my tree, which means once I go to 5, I go back to 4, and once I go to 5, I go back to 4, and that triggers the Apple. The important factor here of how you get this setup going is you just have something like A, Enduring Composure, or B, Juggernaut, or C, some other generation of endurance charge. I like Enduring Composure. You hit yourself and then it generates an endurance charge every second, which makes Eternal Apple trigger every second. And that's how we have these Warcries being automatically applied to us. Overall, this loses us power because we cannot use our maximum endurance charges, because whenever we go to 5, it automatically goes back to 4. So we lose some of the defensive power. And B, you lose a unique shield slot, which is power. And you lose the fact you have to invest into things like Enduring Composure, whereas normally the Warcry effect from the Chieftain would just generate max endurance charges, stuff like that. There is power you lose for automation, but I chose to do it just because it would feel better while playing the character. Now, how are we triggering the Self-Hist to guarantee Internal Apple is happening? I have Forbidden Right here in a trigger wand, which means every 8 seconds it will reapply my Warcry. Now, something I should note here is, remember earlier when I said I don't have 100% uptime on these cries? This is why. If I could get the 4-second trigger, I could have all 3 of these easily in here, and it would maintain perfectly. You'll see when I trigger these war cries here, let's take out the more duration support. It's a 7-second timer. This cooldown has an 8-second timer built into it, the trigger mod here. If I had the 4-second timer, I would have 100% uptime with no issues, and thus I could go for a 4th war cry. Maybe I could self-cast Seismic for 50% more armor, and I could lean into some more defensive scaling that way. But hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with here. The trigger mod is now tied to a temple mod. I just didn't want to invest the extra money of trying to transfer it over to a wand and do all this extra crafting. I just bought a cheaper Fractured Fire Dot Multi wand for a convening wand, and I just did Essence of Fear to give myself Dot Multi, and then I bench craft. I settled. It is what it is. If you want to min-max, you could go for the 4-second trigger, etc., but you do you however you want to do it. Now, that is the Warcry automation. The benefits are things like 20% regen, which hopefully I can show you what this looks like on my character. I have 4k regen at 20k that life. That's my base. What happens when I go to Enduring Cry? I go up to, let's for trigger, I go up to 10k regen. So it's giving about 6k regen, 5.5, whatever it is. Point is, it's a lot of regen. Enduring Cry is insane. And I honestly might consider doing a Chieftain and Gauntlet where I'm self-casting the War Cries. I add in those extra buttons because it feels like a lot of power for a few amount of points. I'm thinking about it. Anyways, I am doing specifically, oh, I forgot to mention, Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice. This is something cool. If you're doing a trigger build where you need a self-hit from Forbidden Rite, if you are life-based, cool little factoid here is this only makes you deal self-damage based on your ES. So when my ES is only 65 energy shield, this thing right here only hits me for like 40 flat damage. It's a great self-hit over regular Forbidden Rite, which you have to have a lot more mitigation for, and it hits a lot harder with chaos damage. But something cool, somebody in my chat shouted it out, and I have to say, fantastic. If you're doing a self-hit mechanic like this, Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice is a great addition in terms of lessening the amount of damage you take from that self-hit, if that's what you want. All right, anyways, something else I want to cover is Shepherd of Souls. This keystone, if you are not aware, it got changed multiple different times. It used to be tied to, or it is tied to the unique Ahuaddles. No, not Ahuaddles. I don't know what the name of it is. It's a Val Scepter that you drop from Ultimatum. Very few people use it. Anyway, Shepherd of Souls, what it does is it gives your Val Souls 80% less cost, but then every time you use a Val skill in the last 8 seconds, it increases the cost. So, for example, if I were to go to... Shoot, I already cleared this map. Let me go to... I'll just go to Blood Aqueducts to try to explain what's going on here and why I like it, and especially like it with Val RF. Essentially, what that ends up meaning is you can still store the max number of souls you would normally have with a Val skill. For example, I think Val Righteous Fire is 30 or it's 40 or something. Let me check. Val Righteous Fire, it goes up to 40 souls per use. So you still can store up to 40 souls. So I'll go back through here. I'll kill some enemies. I still store up to 40 souls, but my skill cost 80% less. So the Val skill cost here is going to be 8 instead of 40, which means there's 5 possible uses. Now, what that means is when I use Val RF, I click this button, you'll see I can only click it 2 more times because the cost went from 8 to 16, which means the 32 is split between those. But after 8 seconds, that cost falls off. So we go back to 4 additional uses. Now, the thing I like about this so much is it's basically very, very good uptime on Val RF. Our Val RF lasts 6 seconds. The downtime of the extra cost lasts 8 seconds. So basically, if you up your duration a little bit more, got Valor F up to 8 seconds or something like that, you could end up effectively getting 40 seconds of duration for your Valor F for the cost of 40 souls, which would normally give you only 8 seconds of duration. And what that means is you can pretty much just use Valor F whenever you want to, and you're gonna have good uptime. It's not like, even though I'm in soul gain prevention mode right now and not generating souls, I can still go and pop it right away regardless, or depending on, you know, if I'm using a lot of my souls and I don't want to wait for the 8 seconds, I can pop it again and still keep running it. And it ends up giving you just, you have to play with it, but it's basically like on-demand Valor F pretty much whenever you want. It's not unlimited. You have to think about when you press the button a little bit, but my word, does that feel pretty good in my opinion when playing Valor F. So I would just shout that out. If you like to build around RF, you're not necessarily, you like to be able to press that button a lot during maps, Shepherd of Souls is a great thing to do that. Now, small or actually rather large caveat to this whole character, I have a helmet which has the mod more damage while in low life. I want to stress, this is not best in slot. This is, I was being cheap and this helmet cost me 5 divines, whereas the equivalent helmet with the more elemental damage mod was listed for 40 divines. This is not ideal. I want to stress this. I do not recommend playing Petrified Blood with Val Righteous Fire. Do not recommend it. It's something that you can do for cheap, but if you'll notice on the screen, it says Val RF deaths 8. You see that text up there? That is because what happens when you're on low RF or low life and you press Val RF, you go to basically 1 HP. So what it does is it's a button where if you press it right when you're about to get hit, you will die. You have a character that has 10k life with Petrified Blood. You're very tanky, but when you press that button, you have a character with like 10 HP and Petrified Blood, and you are not very tanky. So I died multiple times on this character while leveling up to 97 due to the fact I was using this thing. I was forcing in Petrified Blood. I do not recommend it. I would recommend having a reservation on your mana pool, not doing blood magic, and you can force in more damage through things like skitter bots or going Purity of Fire. You can min-max your character a little bit better. This is what I did because I wanted to be cheap about the helmet. I went, how do I put this? I have an addiction to crafting, and I don't really like crafting the RF helmets, so I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth here in a lot of ways, because I made some gear that was really good, like this amulet, but then I was too cheap to make the helmet. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but the TLDR is this helmet, or this build, we probably spent somewhere in the range of 100 to 200 divines, excluding the amulet. The amulet, I think, is a much higher cost due to the focus base, just keeps going up. I had focused amulets lying around, like mirrored copies lying around, that I bought much cheaper throughout the league as I just saw copies pop up, and then I 5-to-1 them. So, full disclosure, if you're playing this build, that's around the cost. Now, overall, my review of the character is, I think it's decent, it's good for mapping, but overall, it's average, it's subpar. It's not something I would overly recommend. I think my version of Gigarth, of multiple leagues back in Crucible, Cyan, I think he's just a lot better at doing an RF build like this, and I think it would perform much stronger than a character like this. So I'd recommend Gigarth if you're looking for the huge life ES scaling RF. It gets more damage and probably ends up being tankier. But this character, for some chill T16 mapping and some okay-ish T17 mapping, it did well. I'm pretty happy and had fun playing it. And it makes me want to play Chieftain in the future. Maybe on a league start, I'll consider a Chieftain RF start. So, anyways, that is the look into the mechanics I tried out and that I liked. I do like Enduring Cry. I do like a lot of the Warcries with infinite power. Not a big fan of the buttons. I like automating them. But maybe in the future, I'll do some more stuff with it. This is just my stab at doing an RF setup with Chieftain and doing more life-based. We went into a large cluster setup and just going for a lot of the life nodes. And we did do life scaling with burn damage with Adorn Jewels. Whether or not burn damage is better than fire dot multi, I don't know. I didn't plug it into POB. My generic way I thought about this is I have a lot of dot multi from doing reflecting mists on jewelry like my ring and my amulet, which means most likely I have more dot multi than most builds would have. So I assumed maybe burn damage would be more. I didn't plug it into POB. Fire dot multi might be more. I don't know. You can do the math yourself. I just wanted to test this out, and that's what I went with. I did a 95 adorned, and I did some magic jewels. If you're looking to make cheap adorned jewels, by the way, just a little shout out to how you do this, just because I think a lot of people think adorned is very expensive to set up. Generally, it's not. The jewels, depending on what you're doing, can be quite easy to create. So I'll give you a little example here. For these jewels, I made a bunch of burning damage life jewels. So if you have increased life and you have burning damage, what I did is I wanted perfectly divine jewels. So what I did is I searched for jewels that already had these two mods and were not corrupted. And I searched. And I found jewels like this, 3C, 5C, 8C, 10C, all the way up to 20, 25C. And what this is you can buy these jewels and split them, and you have a 1 in 3 chance to get 7% life, 20% burning damage jewels. And I went ahead and I went and double corrupted them. Now, the full story is I got really unlucky on my double corruption odds, and it ended up costing me more than just getting magic jewels with these two stats. But that is neither here nor there. That's just how you do it, is what I'd recommend. Either that or buying the fracture. If you have a mod you want that uses the cheap fracture, just a little shout out to, if you want to do Adorn, that's the way to do it. Anyways, Adorn I think is very good for life scaling still. I think it's pretty competitive. For other builds, it's up in the air. I'm going to try doing another min-max project. With the Trickster, I want to do a caster base because I want to showcase that I believe a caster build can be quite strong. And so that's what I'm working on setting up right now. That's going to be a min-max project again. We'll see if I go to the Void again. I don't know. Time will tell. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. This look into some mechanics of Warcries and Shepherd of Souls. Maybe inspires you to do something with your own build and maybe gives you some ideas. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.